I spend like a disproportionate amount of time wondering if like Led Zeppelin, knew when they made Stairway to Heaven that it was going to be like this, this classic that would dominate music forever. I always wonder if some of the time, these artists come out of the studio and go like, yeah, that's going to leave an indelible mark on the world of music. So I'm quite curious. What was the story behind creating the first NFT, and did you have that feeling when you'd done it that it was going to be something that became as big as it is?
I mean, I thought it was an important idea, but it would be silly for me to say, "Oh yes, I thought that it would sweep the world like wildfire, fire, whatever." And it was really strange, like in 2021 at the height of the insanity, and I was walking through Manhattan and just kind of surveying the masses of people all over the street, and I was just thinking, I bet most of these people have heard of NFTs. That idea was so widely dispersed. It was pretty incredible.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the MO podcast. My name is Jonathan Neal. I'm here with my co-founder and partner here, Joey Flores. And today on the MO podcast, we are thrilled to welcome the artists Jennifer and Kevin McCoy. The McCoys don't just work in and across various media. Their wide-ranging projects are all in one form or another an inquiry into the very ideas of media and mediation. From DIY plotters whose drawing instructions are algorithmically derived, to videos that feature the language of luxury real estate sales pushed to their hyperbolic extremes, to pioneering the technology that eventually became the NFT. Their work has been collected variously and or exhibited by major museums and institutions, such as the Pompidou Center, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the British Film Institute, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, the San Jose Museum of Art, the Addison Gallery of American Art, which is close to my heart because it's where I went to high school, and the Sundance Film Festival. So it gives us great pleasure to welcome Kevin and Jennifer McCoy to the show.
Hello.
Hello. Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Great to have you both. Kevin and Jen, we will probably spend obviously some time talking about quantum and monograph and sort of the origination of the NFT, but we like to sometimes start the show off by asking, outside of what might be considered one of the most important projects that you've worked on, what's your proudest artistic achievement?
Well, I don't know if it's an achievement I recently sort of discovered this afternoon. We were figuring out all the places that this, one of our favorite things we've ever made called Horror Chase had been presented. And we realized that it was Critics' Choice at the Rotterdam Film Festival the same year that 24-Hour Party People was also chosen. And I just thought that was such a cool little factoid that I hadn't discovered before. So I guess I'll say Critics' Choice at the Rotterdam Film Festival is what we were in good company with that one.
For those who haven't seen it, tell us what Horror Chase is about.
So it's a project from 2002 that we did as a sort of investigation into the mechanics of narrative. And the idea was that we built a set and shot an actor running through it and made a sort of boiled down the idea of horror to its sort of poetic nugget and had this iconic shot of this actor running away from the camera. But then the twist is that software intervenes and can play different takes that were shot on that film shoot day. And it could also vary the speed and direction of the action. So it's a sort of endlessly cycling loop. And it's based on another film, which was Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2, which was itself a reenactment of Evil Dead 1. So it's this quotation of a quotation in this endlessly echoing chamber of narrative.
And that piece, together with another piece of ours around the same time called Every Shot, Every Episode, is probably the most widely exhibited of our pieces. And it's been shown like over a dozen and a half times over the years. So that was kind of cool. We're putting together paperwork for an institutional acquisition of that piece, and they have an exhaustive questionnaire that necessitated us to go through all of the archives and figure out exactly when and where it was shown, and that's where we unearthed the Rotterdam Film Festival information, which I had totally forgotten.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. And, it's always good to look back and see, who your fellow travelers are in any specific year. And so, yeah, that was great.
I think that's a good segue here. As you guys know, I'm neither a deep expert in fine art nor Web3 and technology. So
but we like you
curious.
so much.
Thank you. I love you guys too. So, keeping that in mind, how would you explain your art practice to me? Like, what is it all about?
What is it all about? We try to, our work is really, we're like landscape painters, except the landscape now isn't the kind of 17th century, 18th century, pastoral scene that maybe have seen in museums or whatnot. The landscape that we see all around us is a media and digital and network landscape. And so we try to think of ideas, or ideas come to us that respond to that role of media and mediation and technology that it plays in our lives and in people's lives. So it's media art, it's digital art, but beyond that, it's hard to classify. Sometimes people say, "Oh, my kids would really like this," and with our work, and I think that's because a lot of times it's funny. And a lot of times it's engaging explicitly with media that's pretty marginal, But I think that that's also a cover. I think people use that their kind of the kid excuse or the kid explanation as a cover for their own enjoyment of the work. It's my theory.
You think Evil Dead 2 is on the margins? Interesting.
Well, time has gone. Time has crowned that as an achievement, for sure. We were engaging with it, 20 plus years ago, right? So this was in the year 2000. It was certainly a cult classic then, no question about it. But its stature has grown over time, and so now, 2024, it is a classic. And also, I think that the kinds of media, the kinds of work that are lauded and upheld as exemplary has broadened really greatly in the last 20 years. And so kind of pulp or, B movie or TV sitcoms or whatever, there's in general a fan culture that's, really swept the world. And in that fan culture context, a lot of media is reevaluated.
Yeah, and that's what I was trying to say earlier, was that I feel like that when we hit our stride, it's that in our practice, all images that one comes across become art material. So we're not looking at, labels stuck on cans in a different way than we would look at drawing and painting. Like all of the visual material that we see around us, we try to figure out, how those images and how the flux of those images is affecting everyone kind of psychologically as they get through the world. So it's important to, think about TikTok, and it's important to think about looping images and, the recursive elements that we see around us. And it's important to think about advertising and advertising media and language. And it's important to think about labels and how text and image overlay. So we're trying to kind of create a level playing field that doesn't have that many distinctions between high art and low art, or high art and advertising, and think about that as our actual lived landscape.
Yes.
Interesting. I'm quite curious about this because, I think in startup, companies, being a solo founder is a very painful endeavor. You're quite on an island. And I know that like a lot of artists may come together to do collaborations from time to time, but you guys are one of the only like kind of true art duos that I'm aware of. what is it like being part of an art duo, and like what do you think are like the benefits? And I don't want to cause any marriage breakups here, but are there any cons to being in an art duo?
You have to commit to a third body of work that is neither of our individual works, and so it's absolutely the case that the stuff that we've produced would not have been what we would have made individually. I really don't think so. And so you got to commit to that third body of work, and that then means the sort of solo kind of thing goes away. It's not that those influences aren't in there; they absolutely are. But just the same, it's like it's a third way, it's a third path, and the benefits of it for us is that the place of art making, the place of thinking of ideas, working through ideas, expands well beyond the studio, because you're kind of just going through your day-to-day life with your collaborator. So it's kind of all the time, and everywhere, which has been really fun, really kind of positive over the years. And then the thing that's interesting kind of at a formal level, I think, is that because there's another person, the work gets talked about early on, and I think that if you're working by yourself in your studio, whatnot, you can be quiet, right? And you can kind of be in your own head, where language may or may not play that much of a role. But in the way that we work, it means you're talking about an idea soon after you even have it, right? And so I think that at language level, that discursive level, is different than what is usually the case, I think, with art making.
Yeah, I think the benefits of collaboration are the same with any collaboration, where there's just a shared risk and a level of permission to try things that I think is more difficult solo. I think people would tend to sort of talk themselves out of ideas that another person will pick up and amplify. So that's the best part of collaboration, is it's comes out of a creative conversation, and also extends your reach. There's twice the hours in the day to execute any given project. I think that is a great way of thinking about it, and it's really different than like a paid assistant or a paid team that you're managing. You're kind of responsible for your own part of it, and the responsibility for its execution is shared. And things can succeed or fail, and that the trauma of failure is blunted, because the conversation was a good conversation and worth having, and can, in its best form, that conversation continues to the audience, which is why I think a lot of our work ends up being participatory or interactive or open to the viewer in an interesting way, because the kind of excitement of the image generation is something we'd like to transfer to the space of the gallery or museum. And I think that's evident in the work, in that there's a certain concentration on ideas about what's live in a space, and that kind of magic in a room being activated either through moving image or sound or interactivity, or even a dumb linguistic joke.
Where did you two meet, or how did you first meet? And then how did you come to, I guess, acknowledge that you would work together? Because I'm imagining it wasn't like a punctual thing. It wasn't like, let's do a project together and try this out. I imagine it kind of grew over time, but at some point there had to have been like a retrospective recognition that like, well, we need to codify this as a collective endeavor rather than a joint individual, right? Like you go from filing your taxes individually to filing them jointly.
Well, I mean, the collaboration started before that in a kind of like, peanut butter chocolate situation where we met in France, and I was finishing up some, film projects that I was just doing. I think it was even outside of school, just finishing. And Kevin had played music, or there was enough going on that I was like, oh, this is someone who could do an interesting soundtrack. So the first thing was that he made some sound for a film, I think it was a Super 8 film that I was finishing up, which turned out really well. And then we went to graduate school together, but worked separately on, different projects. And then it was after graduate school, he did this really awesome project that I just put all the images of on our website called Cabin Fever. And he got to go to Germany, which was then, I think, still East Germany, to make this project. And I wrote an essay for the catalog. And then we had this sort of art by mail career that was kind of starting in graduate school, where you're sending video to different festivals, and we had different, opportunities going on. And it just became clear that it's no fun to I'm going to get on a plane and go to some freezing capital and show my tape, So we started to think about, maybe making a project that would be co-authored. And then we more or less just kept doing that.
Yeah, in grad school, I mean, we made the decision to go to grad school together because we didn't, we wanted to kind of stay together as a couple at that point. And so that was kind of the first, interesting scenario, at least from an institutional perspective. But we were very much doing our own work then. I was doing a bunch of music with this friend of ours, and Jenn was doing these video projects with another friend of ours, and as well as individual work, solo works and stuff. So grad school was, there was a focus on collaboration, I would say, at that program. But we were very much doing our own work, had our own thesis, presentations and that kind of thing. And it was in that year after grad school, where at that time in the media art world, it was a pretty small scene, even globally. And so you're applying to the same things. There's only, sending work to the same places, same people, whatever, and then helping each other out on projects just anyway, because, you're trying to get stuff done and whatnot. So it emerged organically out of that. But there was a first big project that we decided to do together. And it had a certain kind of domestic angle to it, and so it seemed appropriate to kind of do that together. And then it just kind of persisted.
Yeah. But then when we moved to New York and we started kind of joining the, net art community, or I guess what was becoming the net art community, hanging out at places that like The Thing with Wolfgang Stehla, and then soon thereafter Rhizome, we sort of realized there's an incredible pile of collective teams that are part of the net art situation, like eToy and Electronic Disturbance Theater and Fake Shop and
right.
We kept and 0101 and MTAA. Right. So it was sort of like everyone was in a collective. We were the only ones who were using our actual name, but everybody else had some cute name that they were kind of under as a moniker. And it just kind of was like a little bit more mysterious. And so then we started to really mess with that and have, our first exhibition was called We Like to Watch. And it's like, well, who's we, and really started to think about what is that uncomfortable problem that the art world has with authorship when they can't quite pin it down.
And this is the mid 90s.
My favorite story was,
was that mid 90s?
Late 90s.
Late 90s.
Late 90s. Yeah. And my favorite one was, I think it was Leonard Lopate from WNYC. His producer called for a Valentine's Day show, and they're like, we want to know about couples and collaboration. Say something weird and cool. And we were just talking like we are now with you, and we didn't get put on the show. They wanted I don't know what they wanted.
Right.
They wanted to be they
want something far more idiosyncratic or tortured, right? Than
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They wanted, Ule and Marina, where you're like, oh, we're chained to each other, whatever it's going to be. Yeah.
Exactly. It's super interesting. The idea in this sort of mid to late 90s moment of experimenting on in the kind of the net art community, people who are using the internet and using technology at that point for various different creative purposes, that would be a world that was much more comfortable with an idea of distributed or challenged authorship rather than the art world, which is so demanding of a kind of individual artistic subject standing behind whatever the work might be. And it's interesting to hear you describe it even as like graduate school, where you are together but yet apart because the graduate school art environment requires you to kind of be solo operators. And it's not until you're outside of that institutional environment that you then engage in the new media environment, the early internet culture, where now it's like the whole idea was you can be whoever you want to be on the internet, including multiple different people on the internet, right? And that is still such a challenging idea for most people in the conventional visual art world.
Well, and I don't think it was part of the conventional visual art world. I think it maybe had way more to do with theater. Like when I think about Creative Art Ensemble, they were video makers, theater makers, academics, and then electronics disturbance theater coming from theater, fake shop. It was like live events and, kind of performance for the internet. Which you can see, in lots of early net art, that it's, a lot of, very performative gestures that are mysterious, and using that as part of it. And, the idea of a theater group is really interesting, right? Because it's like all of these different, sort of players that are coming together in a very conceptual way, depending on the project, shifting roles and creating opportunities.
Right. It's almost like the evolution of like that moment of public access TV, right? And like TV and like guerrilla television and that moment in the kind of expansion of the cable spectrum that allowed for, easy access for a bunch of creators to sort of get onto it. And that sort of created these kind of collectives. The model, the production company or the studio is having something that's very different than the individual artist in the kind of, painting studio or something working there.
Yeah. I mean, and those groups and that technology, even more than say cable access. I mean, it was premised on this idea of alternative distribution. So this idea of alternative channels to distribute work, be it, experimental films, be it video pieces, be it sound recordings, or whatnot. That was the emphasis. It was access to equipment, certainly, and, and the stuff that enables in terms of getting work made, but there was still fundamentally a focus on alternative distribution channels. And I think that is, primed us to be really interested in the internet as the internet's kind of coming on the scene. It's like, oh, well, this is, first and foremost, just a great alternative distribution mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This actually leads to a question I had written down here. I feel like, you guys are so much more experimental and willing to try different platforms and different distribution strategies and different things like that. I'm kind of curious if, what are some outcomes that were really exciting because you were willing to do something that maybe other artists were not willing to do, and then maybe what's an example of a time that trying something new and cutting edge came back to bite you in the ass?
I think that those are all the same question. They always bite you in the ass, and then they come back around, and it's like, oh, you were so far ahead. This is pretty amazing. So yeah, I don't know. It's all, I don't know. It always seems so like easy to me in my head, and then we start down the path, and you're like, well, this is going to be a problem, and you're going to have to invent this, and you don't know anything about this. Someone's going to have to figure that out, but you just kind of keep going. But I think a hilarious one was Air World because I don't even remember if it was like a grant proposal or we just started. I think it might have been like a written grant, but we thought it would be hilarious if instead of making a website that we just put art on the internet as a push rather than attracting people. And so there was this ad network back in the day called DoubleClick. I don't know if some version still exists. They're a banner ad distribution. So we're like, wouldn't it be funny to make this like very cryptic banner ads for a fake company and partner with DoubleClick to just send them to all of these like very late capitalism kind of websites.
Yeah, push it through their ad network.
Like push it through their ad network so that art would end up on these websites that don't want it or know what it is. And I guess the Walker Art Center and us, and I don't even remember, maybe someone from Rhizome intervened. Anyway, it worked. And we ended up working with DoubleClick, and they gave us what sounded like a vast number, like 3 million impressions or something, but was probably like nothing.
What's an impression?
What's an impression? We don't even know.
But we got 3 million of them.
Yeah, whatever it was, we had 3 million of it. So the project goes live, and like the curator and was bemused and called and was just like, I don't know how to get anyone to see this. Like, we can't find it. Like, it's not visible. What's going to happen if people click on these banner ads? And then we were like, all right, I guess we have to be normal. And we made, the Airworld website and added all these other features to it and, kind of finished the project. But we also have the banner ads as prints, which I think are amazing. Another thing like in the storage that I just unearthed. So that was one where we were like, it sounded so experimental, but actually
it was just ridiculous.
It was kind of dumb. And another dumb one was we did a street fair for the kitchen, as kind of like a performance event, just to bring people. They did like a block party just to support the kitchen.
The kitchen is a longtime media art center in Manhattan.
Yes, and beloved by, various experimenters of all capacities. And we made some software where people could come up and have their picture taken. And then we made a text scrambler that would like print out like a very cryptic kind of fortune telling kind of thing. And then they would get this very digital kind of mushy looking aura photography, like digital aura photography. So you'd get a picture of yourself printed out on this like fax paper printer with a fortune over it. And we thought it was hilarious. And they were like, people would think about it and read it. It's like getting a fortune cookie. But then all the next week, we got these emails from various like psychic organizations that wanted to bring us in to talk about how, technology was changing fortune telling. And anyway, it started as kind of like a joke, but it turned out that people really were invested in it. And this idea of the ghost in the machine was very alive to them and
big time.
and really made sense.
Well, we this show is about people who have built sort of monumental things in the art world. So let's hear the story. Like, ultimately you guys created what would become the NFT.
You mean the monumental animated GIF?
Yes. Actually, I'll two-part this question. One, tell us, about that project and how it came to be. And then, I spend like a disproportionate amount of time wondering if like Led Zeppelin, knew when they made Stairway to Heaven that it was going to be like this, this classic that, would dominate music forever. And certainly there've been other songs like that. But I always wonder if some of the time, these artists come out of the studio and go like, yeah, that's going to leave an indelible mark on the world of music. So I'm quite curious, what was the story behind creating the first NFT, and did you have that feeling when you'd done it that it was going to be something that became as big as it is?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was an important idea, and that was why I was really excited about the context and the opportunity to present it in the way that I did. I couldn't have asked for a better platform to introduce the idea. And it seemed like it was an important idea, a transformative idea. But, you can't really imagine what, it would be silly for me to say, oh, yes, I thought that it would sweep the world like wildfire, whatever. So it was really strange. Like in 2021, at the height of the insanity, and I was walking through Manhattan and just kind of surveying the masses of people all over the street. And I was just thinking, I bet most of these people have heard of NFTs. And it was kind of funny to think of that, that idea arrived to them, that message, that somebody they heard or was told about or whatever of this idea, in some way, shape, or form, and were, kind of confused by it and baffled by it, and then had some degree of understanding, but that, that idea was so widely dispersed. It was pretty crazy. It was pretty incredible. And the other thing too is, it's like, in the context of making it, it's just an idea, another idea. Right? We've done a lot of ideas, done a lot of projects. This was in the context of this Rhizome event at the New Museum. So that was really great. But we've done things kind of like that before in different ways. So there was no reason to think that this was sort of astronomically off the charts different than those things. Although it proved to be. And, the story of like where, kind of where it comes from or where it started is really hard to pin down, because in my mind, it's so intimately tied to our practice, and our body of work, and I think that, there's an interesting question to ask of why then and there, why did this idea happen, at this time with these people at this place, why then? And I think that, our art practice, was really uniquely suited for that idea to arrive via, via our thinking. Just all of this kind of question of how media and meaning intersect. How do things come to mean what they mean? How do media, what's the relationship of media to reality? What's the, what's the connection to systems? What's the language of systems? What's the language used to describe these systems, and how does that relate to how they really actually are? All these sorts of like questions that are going on in our work.
Yeah, and how to make art out of something essentially ephemeral has been a big question as well. Like, in 2010, like, kind of right before this, we had done this curatorial project called No Customs, where all the artists would send us an email and we would fabricate the work, on site, because we were in the Middle East. So we would just have this, conceptual idea with like easily constructed materials that we would repackage, and all of those kinds of experiments, really question the idea of value and, how to, and all of our artwork also was essentially either sculptural or sonic or video package of digital media. Like everything is, had to have a form that you could translate to an audience. So those kinds of things were, always being, kind of discussed. And, the idea of blockchain and putting it together with that was, certainly a novel idea, which I think is still being, hashed out in lots of ways.
Yeah. And, in 2011, I was back in New York, and I was teaching this class called Anarchy in the Imagination. And one of my grad students in that is this guy named Brad Trammell. And he's an artist, really interesting guy, has this hilarious Instagram channel about memes. And he was doing stuff with Silk Road as part of his thesis. And was talking about crypto, and I knew I knew Bitcoin from earlier, from 2010, but he was embedding these kind of physicalized, I guess maybe that came later, to embed in the Litecoin tokens. Anyway, so I just kind of returned to the tech and learning about it, thinking about it, studying it, and whatever. And then once I got my head around the kind of really incredible invention that Satoshi did, of creating in a network natively digital way the idea of uniqueness and scarcity. Scarcity plus digital, plus network digital seems pretty much like opposites. It's like, how do you have unique ownership in a digital context that's without a referee, without a third party, without a whatever, a cop in some way, shape, or form, right? So the invention of that system that, combines cryptography, of course, but also economics and kind of game theory, and, it's kind of part psychology as much as it is computer science, was really pretty amazing. And so my thought of, it was pretty easy thought of, could you make an artwork have the same properties that a Bitcoin has? How would you do that? Could you make a digital artwork that would have those same properties of uniqueness? It's possible with Bitcoin and this kind of currency domain. How would it kind of work with a digital image? And so that was kind of the guiding question. And the insight that I had was to it goes back to this kind of wrapper kind of question, this kind of wrapping, or holder kind of question that Jen was just talking about, was that you don't touch the media. It's not about the media file. It's about a secondary record, some sort of secondary metadata thing, bundle of some kind, and that can have the unique properties. So the media file is untouched. It's not about cryptography. It's not about locking something up, encryption. There's not some sort of DCMA, kind of thing, or, whatever. It's not about that at all. The work is just sort of there, open or not open, or available or not available. But then there's this record, and that record could be the thing that's unique. And then it was, well, how do you make that record believable? Like, how is that, what's the threshold of, for someone to kind of like buy into this as something significant, not as a cultural idea, but I just mean as the sort of like, how do you depict it? How do you depict that thing? And so that was the, so that was kind of the thought, that was kind of the work of how to do that. And the system that I came up with is much more complicated, or is much more thorough, I should say, even than what the system that ultimately won the day, with Ethereum, just kind of a hash and an image reference. Mine had much more direct claims of ownership and an identity component and a specific rights articulation on it. So and so then in that 7-on-7 presentation at the New Museum, it was really just about seeing if the idea was not feasible at a technical level, but just is it real? Does it feel like ownership? I guess it's some version of the right click save problem. It's like the image is just sitting there. So what do you mean I own it? So that was the question even at the time from the audience. And I really greatly benefited from Rhizome creating that context, and then pairing me with Anil Dash, who's just such a great communicator. So we were able to kind of craft a pretty great story and make a rudimentary but functional tool, kind of at the time. And yeah, that's kind of the story.
Can you talk a little bit more about the context that was generative for that, though? Because I think that's something that's very interesting. So, I mean, you've just mentioned that you were like at various points back in New York, you were in the Middle East, but Satoshi's white paper is 2008 to 2009 is the real estate born financial crisis. It's Occupy Wall Street. It's the Arab Spring, and you all are in Abu Dhabi, right? I mean, you're also, we
were in New York for Occupy, and we're down at Zuccotti Park and kind of checking it out. We were not hardcore participants. Many of our friends were, but we certainly were there, and kind of taking it in. And then we moved to, we spent a year in Abu Dhabi. I was, doing some teaching and taking up this opportunity that was there. And then while we were there, Arab Spring happened, and that was, pretty intense, pretty amazing. Just kind of with this uncertainty that was in the air at that time. And so, and I gave a talk on when I was there right at the end on this theme of anarchy and the imagination. So kind of thinking about these decentralized systems, and the thought was that everybody likes the kind of open-ended and go for it mindset of the individual artist. Kind of there's no rules, just go for it. That's all fine and good at the individual level, but what happens when that becomes a political rallying cry? It becomes a lot more problematic all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
So anarchy as a kind of political concept is much more, it has a much tougher road to hoe and row to hoe in the world versus the maverick artist. And so I gave a talk about that, and that was the basis for this class that I gave the next year. So and I had known about Bitcoin in 2010 from its first kind of mention on the tech blog Slashdot. So I kind of was of that generation that learned about it there. And then, end of 2012 into 2013, kind of getting back into it, but really trying to then really deal with it, really think about it, really get into the online community at the time, and which was just completely utopic and then and very kind of cypherpunk. So it was great. It was just a really interesting context then. Really great.
And what do you think? Time. What do you think Abu Dhabi in that period of time sort of taught you or gave you that you might not have been able to get had you still been in New York during those years?
Maybe some free time to think about things.
That's true.
There's not a huge social scene there as an expat living there. But I think also just, like a examination about, what democracy does for people, what happens when it's not there, and, is there any kind of extra governmental system that, can supersede the political vicissitudes of any one culture.
Yeah, and I think on that vein, there's maybe we were living under a sort of like default a sense of development of like, oh, the developing world is developing like us, or something like that, and it was clear in Dubai and in Abu Dhabi that it was developing very differently. It was going in this different kind of direction. It was hard to pin down exactly what it was, but it was on its own path, right? It was on its own trajectory. It was kind of going this way instead of this way, which kind of, if you were trying to apply an old blueprint to it or something, would be different. And so I think that between Occupy and then Arab Spring and a kind of specific and narrow case, together with this sort of broader developmental history that we got to see up close in the Emirates, it was just clear that the future is a lot more open and uncertain and unknown, and subject to kind of forces coming in from beyond and below than you might imagine.
Yeah, and especially vis-a-vis Arab Spring with social media, the way that all these networks of people were finding to communicate with one another and have very direct input into the images and associations that were being generated. It's pretty interesting. And as Kevin moved from thinking about making one to sort of thinking about like, well, could this be a startup? I mean, the idea was that people were at that moment still very, very happy to be giving away all of their content and images to social media. And in the ensuing years, like that has become that's been critiqued pretty harshly, Facebook and Instagram and, all the ownership of images that people will gladly give away in exchange for having a platform was, something that, Monograph was really aware of.
I'm curious, what your perception is of the evolution of the way that digital works and NFTs have been valued so far. And then where do you think it's ultimately going to go? And if you can sort of compare that maybe to the way that fine art is valued versus the way that collectibles are valued, and sort of where do you think NFTs are going to end up?
Yeah, I personally think that NFTs are going to just become part of the contemporary art world. That said, there will be a big kind of collectibles market, and so there'll be blockchain based records for different types of things. But so there'll be NFTs in a kind of strict sense. But I do think that things will go to a one of one direction, in a kind of unique direction. That's just personally my feeling. Maybe editions, something like that. But it's going to just become part of contemporary art, and I think that the bigger question about like kind of the longevity of them, and I do believe that the idea is here to stay. I think that it is too important of an idea to not, to go away, and that's this idea of digital property. And I think that, if the world was going to get less digital rather than more digital, then value takes place in things like real estate and kind of being prepared and kind of in a kind of material reality sense, so kind of being set up in a real estate way. If the world is going more digital, then there's really a fundamental decision that people can make, and they can make this at an individual level. Is it about just the raw dispersion of ideas? And if that's the case, then it's about memes, and it's about kind of meme momentum, and the kind of just kind of ideas just kind of flowing in that way, in the kind of classic sort of social media way, or is in a digital world, is digital scarcity and digital uniqueness and digital property going to be most important? And if that's the case, then you need something like NFTs to be the way that happens. And it's an open question whether will it be just trusted third parties that keep track of that stuff, or will it be kind of autonomous, decentralized networks, permissionless networks that keep track of those things? So much of the internet has become about kind of proprietary capture. You wouldn't be a fool to think that then was going to apply to digital property as well too, and it'll be some kind of centralized permissioned federation kind of thing or something like that keeps track of it. I hope not, because I'm of the decentralized tribe, and want to see that question of digital property answered through decentralized networks and decentralized ownership.
Kevin, this is actually this was another question I had for you. So much of the talk about decentralization with crypto feels disingenuous to me, because so many of the companies that are building these supposedly decentralized services are then like hosting all of their stuff on Amazon Web Services or whatever. It just feels very much like the promise of total decentralization by Web3 tools is just overstated by quite a lot. That much of these tools actually still rely on old technologies and centralization in one way or another. Would you agree with that, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. The big challenge in Web3 is discovery. It's like, how do you find things? How do you find people? How do you find things? And then how do you have a spam resistant discovery mechanism? And so, and that goes back to kind of identity, kind of identity questions. Now, identity works in a decentralized context. And those are both really hard problems. And so people have absolutely fallen back to the convenience and safety of kind of Web 2 versions of these things, be it backend file storage through Azure or AWS, or distribution through Twitter, and maybe Discord, and and maybe Telegram. But so we're far from any kind of web native kind of thing. And again, the most secure, the most decentralized, the most robust, which still has a way to go, is Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin itself. You can be fairly autonomous in Bitcoin. It's funny because it's not that sexy, it's not something that you talk about. Right? It's like let me tell you about my Bitcoin, decentralized Bitcoin reality or whatever, and it's like, so it's by definition invisible, you know what I mean? Ideally, right? And so it doesn't give people a lot to talk about. And so they want to kind of, talk about it or do things with it, or they want to do something with their Bitcoin. They want to invest it, have it grow, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to do some, anyway. So just, we quickly get brought back into, kind of the present state. And even on, like, say, the Ethereum side, it's been pretty, I'm more of a Bitcoin maxi than an ETH maxi, but, in many ways, but Ethereum is pretty interesting, pretty amazing to see what they've accomplished, what's been achieved there. Certainly very centralized in many of the applications and many ways that people use it. But there's a lot of real real decentralization happening. There's a lot of permissionlessness stuff happening there. But it's sobering. Them in terms of like the cypherpunk ideal, or kind of like we can take on the state kind of thing, is just like, yeah, look what happened with Tornado Cash. It's like, tell that to the Tornado Cash dudes. It's like they got shut down big time, and it took them a day to find them and shut the whole thing off. For the for 99.99% of the world.
You guys are both teachers at the university level, so changing directions a little bit on the conversation here. What are some things you guys are observing about the artists coming onto the art scene right now that excite you, and what are some things that you wish that the student community was maybe gearing up better at?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that in general, I want to see artists embrace the inherent power of their métier, and not be afraid to, kind of fall back into, being decorators for the rich. I think that there's a much more fundamental role that they can be playing. But I think that there's just, certainly in the art world and in broader, kind of society, a sense of uncertainty and kind of dread about the future. People are not necessarily feeling, super confident. And so that can lead to a sort of a conservatism. And so like a prevailing sense of professionalism, or kind of budding wannabe professionalism, together with a sort of sense of uncertainty economically and the conservatism that comes from that, those two things are, professionalization plus conservatism is bad news for art and for the health of the art world. And so, I think that it's important to, push against those things. We're not young people. There's young people that are doing it. So it's going to, of course, happen in different ways for different people in different generations. So I remain optimistic. I'm an optimist. But specifically, I don't know, Jen. What do you think about goings on?
Well, I mean, the one thing you could safely say about digital art before NFTs was that you were safe from the market. So, and the good news about that was that it just was a sort of open field for investigation, and you weren't thinking about, lifestyle. Like, it was all going to be sort of experimental, and you didn't really have to think about, the market, because there just wasn't one. I mean, there were a lot going on, but not that.
Remuneratively.
Not remuneratively. And so, yeah, I think it is a sort of conservatism. And yet I feel that, there is with this sort of downcast of like, oh, there's no way to get a foothold in the market or a foothold in the galleries, because so many great galleries have closed, and, the middle is kind of gone. There's, people starting new galleries every day, but I feel like more are closing than are starting. So, there's a flip side there that I think students are seeing. They're self-organizing. They're creating work for one another in that sort of market-free way, not because the market isn't like happening, but because they just have there's such a chasm between where they're coming from and the highest levels that are sort of, sucking in all available energy.
Interesting. Okay, so we have three last questions we like to ask that are just a little off the beaten path. So we call this the more opinions section. So what's a person or project in the creative field or cultural sector that you guys are real excited about right now, or somebody that you admire, and why?
Interesting. Well, I got a chance to see Autumn Night perform maybe last fall, and it was such an intriguing situation. Autumn Night is this performer who comes from, I think, maybe social work and therapy from NYU, and has made this incredible, performance circuit that's really just very awkward and very self-reflective on the part of the audience, super funny, very open-ended. Really just, it just felt like, something that you really have to be in a space with people to understand and enjoy. So I'm a huge fan and looking for opportunities to go see them again.
I'm going to give a shout out to our friend David Grubbs and his collaborator back in the day, Jim O'Rourke, with their release of this 3-album box set of their band Gaster del Sol, which I think is the world needs to hear now. They were known then, and the sounds they were making, the music they were making, I think can reach a new audience and kind of have a new voice these days. So I'm psyched for the Gaster box set.
This is increasingly becoming one of my favorite parts of the podcast. It's like like we've heard about Captain Boomer Collective that makes these massive beached whale replicas and then goes out and pretends to be scientists and works on them. Now we're talking about three album drops from old bands. I mean, like, this is just like increasingly becoming the cool part of the show, actually. So next question, we'll coin this as the massive opportunity question. If you had a $10 million budget to do anything with in terms of making a project or a company or an artwork or whatever, what would you what's the most ambitious thing you could think to do with $10 million?
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's a good budget.
Yeah, that's a big budget. I don't have my elevator pitch, my kind of startup elevator pitch. I'm past my startup phase. I'm not interested in that forum, just as an aside. So I don't, so I might need less money than 10 mil. We're increasingly, we're getting back into ideas about automation and robotics. And so, we used to do these kind of very, kind of primitive live camera miniature film set pieces. And then we've, been doing a lot of, built these plotters and these kind of painting machines and doing things in the studio with these, kind of computer controlled production devices. But we definitely have some ideas for some much more elaborate, automated robotic production, environments that would work in exhibition contexts.
Yeah, I think picture James Turrell meets robots. And I think that's where it would go, like a vast robot army of art makers.
Yeah, I think that that idea of creating, a real, showing this. The trick with this kind of thing is that you're from an audience perspective, is you're showing this simultaneity of this production process and the kind of distribution, the presentation process. And we're all inundated with production outputs, where there's no kind of end to that, with our screen lives. And so, and we even make, everyone's kind of making them in a kind of user generated content, kind of TikTok app kind of thing. But I think that there is still this role to play artistically in marrying those two things, as closely as possible, but at a very high production value, kind of with these kind of robotic camera rigs and kind of robotic lighting and camera rigs.
Yeah, I think it would have to be some big outdoor installation festival.
But that's probably not 10 mil. I bet it's 1 mil.
I don't know, survival research laboratory scale, but
survival research laboratories meets a 21st century TV studio.
That's right. That's it. Yeah.
So it's SRL meets live meets the Super Bowl of the production crew of the Super Bowl.
That's probably $50 million though. So,
I was going to say, see, look at that.
We have to really run the numbers on this.
You got to run some numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like a bunch of artists that, at first they were like, oh, we could do, we don't even need 10 million. And now you need 50 and you totally overblown your budget.
Yeah, that's like that. That's a 5-minute conversation. Yeah.
It happens.
Okay. Last question. If you could steal any one work of art in the world to have for yourself, which one would you like to live with?
That's a great question. That is a great question. Well, I was in Paris this spring and saw the big Rothko show, so those Rothkos are pretty freaking nice. But I'm not ready to commit to that. I don't know. What do you got?
I don't know. I was in a room with some massive Anselm Kiefers, and I think that would be interesting. Or maybe some Rebecca Horn, like giant mechanical sculptures.
That would be pretty weird to live with.
That'd be fun to live with.
The grand piano kind of upended and kind of dangling from the roof. From the ceiling.
Yeah. Or I was thinking the one that there's like two arced pieces of metal with rhinoceros horns that click together. Kinetic sculpture. I think that would be good.
That would be pretty fun to live with. Yeah. Bill Viola's The Sleep of Reason. That would be awesome to live
like
with.
one room is just, you go here, want to see my video installation? And it's just
beautiful
there.
2-channel video installation. That would be awesome to live with. Or Room of St. John of the Cross. I'd take that one too.
Or that early Gary Hill piece where it's like a school desk, but then it like extends into the room, and then there's a surf ocean video at the end of it.
Yeah, this giant elongated school desk. That's awesome.
You guys are going to be busy stealing a lot of stuff here.
Yeah. You're going to need a significant getaway plan on this one.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. I mean, we knew this was going to be a fun episode, and thank you guys for coming on and talking a bit about, all of the exciting things you've put together. We appreciate it.
I'm on this, advice, distilling the advice kind of thing down to artists, and the advice is just don't stop, just keep going. And that's the only real recipe for the artistic life. It's only over when you say it's over. Just keep going. And then the other corollary to that is don't let your work get you down. That is the main challenge to keeping going is you get kind of sick of yourself or sick of it or bummed out or like whatever. So don't let your work get you down and just keep going. That's my advice.
Sounds
nice.
good.
Nice.
Yeah, sage advice. All right, Kevin, Jen, thank you guys very much for coming on.
Thanks guys. This is great.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.